Life's going to be tough from here on out. Who would have thought you'd end up paralyzed? It's all because you didn't listen to your in-laws. The energetic voice of my mother-in-law rang out from the speaker of the landline phone. It was an afternoon at my parents' house. My mother, holding the phone, looked at me with a blank expression, clearly not understanding what was being said. It seemed someone had been in an accident, and my mother-in-law was taking delight in it. With a puzzled face, my mother asked my mother-in-law, What exactly do you mean by tough? As my mother and I exchanged glances, my mother-in-law laughed heartily over the phone. She had lost her husband early and had asked my husband and me to live with her, saying she was lonely living alone. Initially, she said we wouldn't have to pay rent or do chores, but within 2 months, she changed her tune, saying, it's common courtesy to pay some sort of compensation, and we ended up arguing repeatedly. In the end, our relationship couldn't be repaired. At my husband's suggestion, I was in the process of moving out of my in-laws' house and transporting my belongings back to my parents' place. My mother-in-law, who had a nasty personality and constantly troubled me with her mean words, now directed her spiteful comments at my mother. So, your silly daughter got into a major accident because her brakes failed. Isn't that hilarious? Shocked, I couldn't help but speak up towards the speakerphone. Are you talking about me? I'm perfectly fine. What accident are you talking about? My name is Martha. I'm 35 and currently work as a salesperson for luxury accessories at a department store. I've been working in this field for nearly 15 years since graduating from community college. Though I'm a veteran in my profession, I find joy and fulfillment in keeping up with new trends and customer demands, working energetically every day. The age range at my workplace is wide, but since it's a job selling women's accessories, the staff is predominantly female. Among them, I'm one of the few who is still single. I've always wanted to get married and have been actively looking, but as I approached 35, I hadn't found the right match. Determined, I decided to try a marriage agency. I listened earnestly to the consultant, discussing my values and lifestyle in detail. They considered this and matched me with a man named Henry, an engineer who was a year older than me. He made a good impression with his pleasant demeanor and slightly shy way of listening to me. We hit it off and went on several dates, getting to know each other better. While I sometimes slipped into my salesperson mode, talking with him gradually put me at ease. As we met more often, Henry began to talk passionately about his favorite books, and I found myself agreeing and engaging more freely, the exact opposite of our initial meetings. We both felt that we wouldn't find a better match and decided to get married, building deep trust in each other. We were looking for a new home near Henry's family's place. Though his father had passed away early, he had left a substantial inheritance, and Henry's mother, Susan, lived alone. Henry had moved out after starting his job and only returned occasionally. Loneliness had been a long-standing issue for her, and one day she asked us to live with her. I've been living alone for so long that loneliness has become overwhelming. I'm at an age where I have to worry about health issues too. If you're looking for a new place, you could live here rent-free. It would mean so much to me to have you both here. Of course, I won't interfere with your newlywed life. Please, consider it for my peace of mind. When we met her, she seemed gentle and reserved, saying she would handle the chores and cleaning since she wasn't working. Her loneliness was palpable, and we couldn't bring ourselves to turn her down. Moreover, we were planning to start fertility treatments, which would be expensive and long-term. We intended to save on living costs, and living with my mother-in-law would not only save money but also allow us to save more for the treatments. We can transition to treatment in a planned manner. With this in mind, we started to seriously consider living with her. Honestly, I think it's a great idea. Instead of living nearby for a while and then moving in together, why don't we just start living with her now? It'll save us from changing our lifestyle multiple times and wasting money on moving costs. You're right. I don't want to see your mom looking so lonely. Living with my mother-in-law did make me nervous because of the typical tensions between a wife and her husband's mother. However, both for our financial situation and her emotional well-being, there didn't seem to be a better solution. After much discussion, we decided to move in with her. When she heard our decision, she said, "Thank you. Thank you so much." Being with family is the greatest happiness, and she cried tears of joy. We moved in our belongings and started our new life smoothly. But within just a few months, her attitude completely changed. One day, she suddenly spoke to me with a stern expression. "You're always coming home late. What's going on? You say it's because of work, but is it really? Sales jobs end when the customers leave. Where exactly are you working that keeps you out so late after the department store closes?" Taken aback, I was at a loss for words. Then she continued, "So? When are you going to quit?" I had a responsible position and my work included meetings and other tasks beyond sales, especially during busy periods when overtime was inevitable. My husband knew this and supported me even when I came home later than him. I never expected to be pressured to quit my job and stay home. "If you're married into the family, you should be dedicating yourself to the household. How long do you plan to keep working? In my day, this would be unthinkable. If I'd known you'd be like this, I wouldn't have let you marry my son." Susan. I value my work, and Henry and I have decided to support each other in our lives. Continuing my job is a choice we've made together. I managed to say this while trembling. But she just laughed derisively at my words. "A woman working only causes disorder in the home. Martha, you have a responsibility to maintain the house while my son is away. You need to understand that." She wouldn't listen to me and kept pressuring me to quit my job. Her irrational accusations escalated, and she even suggested that my late returns meant I was hiding something. I hurriedly talked to my husband to mediate. Of course, I had nothing to hide. My husband was shocked by her sudden change but tried to calm things down. Although she was displeased, she begrudgingly accepted the situation and settled for complaining. However, the constant snide remarks didn't stop. She suddenly brought up another issue. "Aren't you ever going to start paying rent?" "What?" "But, you said we didn't need to pay rent, that it was enough for us to live here." "Don't you know that's just an adult's way of speaking? Even close relationships require courtesy. Don't you feel ashamed living here for free? Honestly, with that high-paying job you insist on keeping, you should be able to afford it." She completely contradicted the initial agreement and tried to back out of our deal. Even though she had an inheritance, we were covering most of the living expenses. There doesn't seem to be any financial dissatisfaction around her. We were puzzled by her sudden change in stance. Her remarks were so disrespectful that I finally stood up to her. "You told us we didn't need to pay rent, and that's why we moved in. If that's not true, my husband and I will move out immediately." At this, she turned red with anger. "Ungrateful. You don't even pay rent or offer any compensation." Apparently, she wanted us to pay her a sort of gratitude money instead of rent, but the financial burden would be the same. Moreover, the amount she demanded was much higher than the going rate for nearby apartments. I discussed this with my husband, and we agreed to give her a small monthly allowance. "She probably just wants some spending money," my husband sighed. "Mom's lived alone for so long, and if a bit of money makes her happy, it's a small price to pay." Although we didn't give her as much as she wanted, the allowance seemed to pacify her for a while. She wasn't happy, but at least one problem seemed resolved. Or so we thought. Just when we started to feel relieved, a new issue arose. My husband's sister, Kate, returned home unexpectedly. She had been married and living away, but due to unforeseen circumstances, she got divorced. One day, she showed up with a large suitcase and announced, "I'm moving in from today." "I know it's sudden," she said, "but my husband was cheating on me. So, I slapped him with divorce papers and left." "Don't worry. I've been a housewife for a long time, so I won't be a burden. Since we're all here, how about we order sushi for dinner?" my sister-in-law suggested, demanding a lavish meal. My mother-in-law seemed thrilled to have her daughter back, and it was clear whose side she was on. Her ex-husband was a wealthy company executive, and my sister-in-law's flashy designer clothes stood out. Imagining her extravagant spending, I felt a headache coming on. We had only met a few times at our engagement and wedding. At 40, she was 4 years older than me, making conversations awkward and unengaging. Upon learning about my job, she immediately said, "You must get employee discounts, right? Can't you get stuff for free for family?" Both my husband and I were stunned. When I flatly refused, she glared at me, annoyed. "Oh, I see. You're such an inconsiderate wife. Well, with your age, I guess Henry was just desperate." With her joining us, I felt my patience wearing thin. My mother-in-law would complain of back pain and refuse to help with the housework, leaving everything to me. When I suggested splitting chores with my currently unemployed sister-in-law, she dismissed it saying, "I'm exhausted from the divorce drama. I didn't come back to be a maid." With my husband also worn out from his engineering job, my workload at home only increased. Eventually, my stress hit a breaking point. I started crying unexpectedly, couldn't sleep, and was far from being able to start infertility treatments. Even daily life became a struggle, and I began considering counseling. Seeing me in such a state, my husband suggested, "We need to move out right away. This is too much. I can't keep putting you through this. I'm sorry. I should have prioritized you over my mom and sister. But we can't afford it. Money isn't the issue. Your health is what matters most." He started looking for a new place immediately. But it was the season for graduations and new job postings, making affordable rentals scarce. It looked like it would take time before we could leave his family's house. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law's behavior worsened. As a sales associate, I used high-end cosmetics and accessories for work. Unemployed, with little spending money, she seemed envious of my possessions. I noticed items missing or moved. When I confronted her, she nonchalantly admitted it. "So what? I like this brand too. I can borrow a little, can't I? These are my personal items. Please don't use them without asking. Don't make a fuss over a lipstick or borrowing a necklace for a day. We're family, so stop being so uptight. Mom, tell her she's being unreasonable." Despite repeated warnings, she would bring my mother-in-law, and together they would scold me. My mother-in-law would sigh and say, "You need to loosen up. She's your sister-in-law, not a stranger." With no improvement, I took measures to protect my belongings, including getting a lockbox. But even the lock was broken with tools. Seeing the shattered lock, I finally snapped. "No matter how many times I warn you, you don't change, and now you've broken my lock. If you can't respect basic boundaries, we can't live together. I'm leaving." I declared this to the two of them and began packing my things into a large bag. My mother-in-law followed me around, yelling, "Think it over. Can't you tolerate this?" When she realized I wasn't listening, she started making a phone call. To my surprise, she was calling my parents. "I heard her complaining. What kind of upbringing did your daughter have?" I couldn't hear my mother's response, but soon my phone rang. Was that Henry's mother just now? She said some strange things. "Martha, are you okay? Are you having trouble with her?" Worried by the rude remarks, I explained the situation. My mother was furious. "Come home right away," she insisted. When my husband heard about this, he agreed, "I'll pick you up as soon as we find a new place." I started preparing in earnest and left the next day. Naturally, neither my mother-in-law nor sister-in-law came to see me off. I planned to shuttle between my parents' house, my in-laws, and work to gather my things. A few weeks later, on a morning before my afternoon shift, I was cleaning at my parents' house when the phone rang. When my mother checked, she said, "It's your mother-in-law," with a puzzled look, and answered the phone. As she listened, her expression turned strange, and she signaled to me. Apparently, my mother-in-law was saying something odd. When we put it on speaker, her familiar loud voice rang out, sounding pleased. "This is going to be tough for you. I can't believe what happened to that girl." "Who are you talking about? What exactly happened?" "Your daughter, of course. Karma, maybe? Your stupid daughter caused a huge accident because the brakes failed." My mother and I looked at each other in shock. I hadn't left the house all morning. My mother-in-law continued, sounding even more pleased. and causing such a huge accident before going to work. It's her own fault for not quitting. It's unbelievable. The whole thing was too confusing. I interrupted, speaking into the speaker. Susan, you mean me? I'm fine. What accident are you talking about? What? No way! What do you mean? My mother-in-law was clearly flustered. Even if she was lying, her story made no sense. As I pressed for clarity, she kept stammering, "How are you okay? If it wasn't you, then whose accident was it?" The conversation went in circles until my husband burst into my parents' house. He grabbed my shoulders, visibly relieved to see me safe. "Martha, thank goodness you're okay. What on earth is going on? What happened with your mother and you?" My husband then explained that his sister had been in an accident. What? Your sister? I'm just glad you weren't involved. We need to go to the hospital. Will you come with me? I quickly agreed. I arranged to take the afternoon off and we hurried to the hospital. When we arrived, my sister-in-law was still being treated, but we were told her injuries were not life-threatening and she was conscious. My distressed mother-in-law was there, and we all felt a bit relieved at the news. As we shuttled between the hospital and their home to gather essentials, her treatment concluded. She was brought to her room, looking exhausted but able to speak. My husband went to her side and started asking questions. I was driving to work, and the brakes failed. I crashed into a utility pole. They said no one else was involved, but I... Yeah, it was a deserted road, so no one else was hurt. But you're back. We had already been informed about the potential after-effects of her self-inflicted injuries. Though saved by swift rescue, she had severely injured her back. As a result, she was now paralyzed from the waist down. She couldn't move her legs or walk, and living independently was out of the question. The paralysis was likely permanent, according to the doctors. When my sister-in-law was told this, she exclaimed, "I can't believe it. This can't be happening. I'm going to sue the maintenance company." She started to cry and tried to thrash about, but with only her upper body mobile, my husband easily restrained her. Indeed, brake failure suggested maintenance negligence. I noticed my mother-in-law in the corner, looking pale. "Are you okay, Susan?" Despite everything she'd put me through, I couldn't hold a grudge seeing her like this. She looked like she might faint, but she didn't respond when I spoke. My husband turned to her with a harsh, cold voice. "Do you know anything about the accident?" I was startled by his tone and looked at him in surprise. "Do you know anything about her car accident?" he repeated. My mother-in-law, trembling and pale, shook her head. "No." Despite my husband's repeated questioning, her answer remained the same. "No, I don't know," she denied, but a growing sense of dread was building inside me. My husband asked my sister-in-law for permission and then started using her smartphone. All our family cars had dash cams, and we could check several weeks of footage through a special app. He pulled up the data from my sister-in-law's car and pressed play. What we saw next was shocking. "Isn't that you, Susan?" The garage lights came on, and there was my mother-in-law. She peeked around the car's hood, looking inside the vehicle. She carried something and repeatedly squatted in front of my sister-in-law's car. The dashcam recorded both video and audio, so we heard scraping noises and her muttering. "This is tricky, what? This is so heavy, is it here? This should be the right wire, right?" From her occasional mutterings, it was clear she was under the car, searching for something. Then, a loud snap echoed. She had cut something under the car. Both my sister-in-law and I immediately understood what she was doing, and we went pale. Faced with the footage, my mother-in-law started to shake. Her voice from the video filled the room with chilling words. "This will send that daughter-in-law straight to hell." It all made sense now, her demeanor when she called my parents' house. My mother-in-law had intended for me to have the accident. But it was my sister-in-law who ended up crashing. She had mistaken the cars, but it was clear she had tampered with them intentionally. "Unbelievable, Mom, what if I had died?" My sister-in-law, now furious, berated her, but my mother-in-law yelled back, I couldn't tell the cars apart. There was a reason for her mistake. Coincidentally, my sister-in-law and I both drove the same model and color, standard black compact cars. When she moved back in, we were both shocked to discover this. Since my parents' house didn't have parking, I left my car at in-laws' house, only using it for work. It was rare for either of us to mix up our cars, as we had designated spots in the garage. However, my sister-in-law often parked in whichever spot was more convenient for her. Despite my warnings, she never changed, and my mother-in-law must have gotten confused. The previous day, I had used my car but returned to find my sister-in-law's car in my spot. So, I parked in her spot and went straight home. But my mother-in-law knew none of this. Not being knowledgeable about cars, she went ahead with her sabotage. My sister-in-law wept bitterly, blaming her mother, you should have checked properly. This is all your fault. My mother-in-law, now panicking, lashed out irrationally. Why didn't you park correctly? It's your fault for being in the wrong spot. Now look at you, what are we supposed to do? What do you mean, what are we supposed to do? This is your fault, Mom. This isn't an accident, it's a crime you committed. Their shouts echoed through the hospital, turning the place into chaos. My husband pulled me out of the room, citing the intentional tampering, and called the police. Because it was a recent accident, the police arrived quickly. We provided the dashcam footage and the recordings from the hospital, leading to my mother-in-law being taken away. As she was led out, my tear-streaked sister-in-law looked at us slowly. We're family, right? You and Martha will take care of me, won't you? She subtly hinted at needing care, but before I could respond, my husband answered immediately. No way. As an engineer familiar with cars, he glared at her, clearly unsatisfied with her. Isn't the accident partly your fault too? First, if the brake hose was cut, the warning light would have come on. And if the brake fluid was leaking, you would have noticed something was off with the brake pedal right away. You should have stopped the car then, but you kept driving until you got seriously hurt. From my point of view, your behavior is just as problematic. My husband bluntly criticized and then operated his smartphone. Watch this, he said, playing a video. It was footage from my sister-in-law's dashcam, but from a different time. The timestamp showed it was this morning. Before the accident, as she was about to leave for work. Naturally, my sister-in-law appeared in the footage. She was clearly struggling with a heavy load, trying to place it in her car. It looked like a small safe. I recognized it and exclaimed. Isn't that your watch safe? My husband nodded with a stern expression. For some reason, my sister-in-law was trying to carry off the safe containing my husband's expensive watches. She hurriedly loaded the safe into her car without checking her surroundings or buckling her seatbelt and attempted to drive out of the garage. As we watched this sequence unfold, she turned as pale as our mother-in-law had earlier. My husband demanded, care to explain? My sister-in-law hesitantly confessed something shocking. She initially claimed she was leaving for work, but in reality, she planned to sell the watches. Though she didn't have the key to the safe, she intended to break it open after she got away. She noticed the brake problem immediately but panicked and tried to drive away before anyone caught her, which led to the accident. She tearfully tried to explain, but my husband looked at her with disgust. I needed money to pay off my ex-husband immediately. I thought I could just borrow it for a while. My sister-in-law had returned home after her divorce, but even then, she had lied. She had claimed her husband cheated, but in fact, she was the one who had an affair. She had been ordered to pay alimony, draining her savings and leaving her unable to live on her own, forcing her to move back in with her parents. Unwilling to reveal her humiliating alimony situation, she painted her ex-husband as the villain. Since returning, she hadn't worked, and her unpaid alimony was mounting. She began secretly selling valuable items from the house to get by but eventually ran out of things to sell. She then set her sights on my husband's expensive watches, leading to the accident. Thinking about the alimony stressed me out, but using Martha with Mom to relieve stress made me feel better. That's why I treated you so badly. I'll change, please don't abandon me." She pleaded in a wheedling tone, perhaps despairing over her future, but upon seeing our dispassionate faces, she realized her plea was futile. Her expression hardened, and she began shouting, "Don't run away. Take responsibility. Take care of me." Given her past behavior, there was no way her demands would be met. "I still owe alimony. I had the accident instead of you. You owe me, you ungrateful wretch. You ruined my life. You should pay my debts." My husband and I listened silently as she ranted incoherently, likely exhausted from the day's events. Her shouting attracted several nurses, and we quietly left the room, agreeing never to return. Later, the police interviewed us, asking if we knew anyone besides my husband who was knowledgeable about cars. Since my mother-in-law's actions were clearly criminal, she faced arrest. However, we couldn't imagine how my mother-in-law, who didn't drive or know much about cars, had come up with the idea to cut the brake hose or where she'd gotten the tools. We had no one in mind who fit the bill. A few days later, an investigation revealed a surprising truth. Before we got married, my mother-in-law had met a young man named Jack, spending large sums of money on him. Jack targeted older women, pretending to date them and extorting money. My mother-in-law had spent her inheritance and living expenses on Jack, and when her savings dwindled, she proposed living with us. She also tried to extort more money from us under the guise of rent and other expenses, but we repeatedly refused to pay, saying it wasn't what we had agreed upon. Desperate, she consulted Jack. He suggested a terrifying plan. "If your daughter-in-law dies, your son will get the insurance money. You could use that to stay at expensive hotels and go to amusement parks every day." Already under Jack's control, my mother-in-law latched onto this idea, bought the necessary tools, and carried out the plan. However, she sabotaged my sister-in-law's car instead, leading to the tragic accident. Jack's identity was also revealed. During questioning, Jack denied everything, saying, "I talked about it, but it was all a joke. I didn't tell her what to buy or say anything specific." He claimed that while he did engage in these fake dates, he wasn't in a romantic relationship with my mother-in-law, just taking advantage of her generosity. "I wasn't serious, so there's no way I'd encourage her to commit a crime," he insisted. However, the police investigation uncovered evidence that he had indeed planned to take my insurance money from my husband. Additionally, Jack had other charges of extortion against women besides my mother-in-law. Thus, Jack was arrested along with my mother-in-law. After the trial, my mother-in-law received a prison sentence. My sister-in-law tried to contact her ex-husband, hoping he'd take care of her, but he had moved on and refused to help, demanding she pay the remaining alimony instead. She started using welfare services for help, but her rude and demanding behavior caused most private services to refuse her, leaving her with no choice. Eventually, a no-nonsense caregiver who didn't tolerate her antics took over. My sister-in-law kept complaining, "I want someone kinder, someone warm and caring," but no one else was willing to take the job. So, she had to stick with the no-nonsense caregiver. My life changed too. Worried about my parents after all this, I requested a transfer to a store closer to my hometown. It was approved, and I started working near my family. My husband, feeling uncomfortable in the town where his family lived, found a new job, and we decided to move near my parents. We're starting anew, and my husband, always considerate of me, has been supportive through it all. The watches my husband had stolen were eventually returned by the police, although the safe was damaged from the accident. Some watches were broken, but my husband said, "I'll keep these as a reminder of our family," deciding to cut ties with his family. Both my husband and I are getting used to our new environment. Now, we are focusing on our original goal of starting infertility treatment and are currently choosing a hospital.